Hello everyone, welcome to our first webinar. We are so glad that you could join us today. My name is Pritika Akhil Kumar and I'm the host of this evening's session. I'm an architect and urbanist based in Chennai, India, and I'm also the founder of CoLab. People for Cities is our initiative through which we hope to engage with wider sections of the general public in meaningful conversations on key issues that shape our cities. To start with, we will be hosting a series of webinars during and beyond this period of lockdown. This evening's session will give you an introduction into what it means to be an active citizen who participates in the city, and more importantly, why you should care about the current and future patterns of development that we are being subjected to. So, to begin with, I'm going to introduce CoLab a little bit. So we're a multidisciplinary design and research collaborative based in Chennai. Some of the buzzwords that you will hear during this presentation, like collaboration, collective, participation, etc., are actually central to our ethos. We believe in the fact that there can be no one-size-fits-all approach to any design problem, which is why we tap into a wide network of collaborators who we work with on different projects. So we have quite a diverse mix of participants here today, which is very exciting to us because usually we find that architects are interested in such things, but then it needs to move beyond that sort of group to the users because that's who end up benefiting or suffering from the urban realm that we create. So we're going to take it right back to the beginning and establish some context. We'll be examining the nature of the design process and also defining basic concepts like participation, democracy, etc. We're choosing to keep this presentation open to all forms of design that deal with the city. So we're going to be using the term spatial practice or spatial design rather than architecture, urban design, etc. So first of all, we'd like to sort of establish the difference between art and design, and then decide what spatial practice must come under. Art is an expression of the thoughts and emotions of the author or artist intended as a thing of beauty. It is subjective, provocative, and not made to serve a specific need. On the other hand, the term design denotes some kind of plans or blueprints generally made to enable the construction of prototypes, products, or processes. It's objective, functional, and purpose-driven. Now, there's obviously some overlapping territory here, which is why there is the occasion, which is why there is some occasional confusion. This confusion also manifests itself in the realm of spatial practice. Classically, architecture is said to have been an art form rather than design, but its problem-solving nature places it more effectively within the design community. With this in mind, let's look at the conventional spatial design process. So the image that you see here on your right is the plan of works that has been established by the Royal Institute of British Architects, or RIBA. But this is generally applicable to most design processes that you see around the world. What you don't realize, though, is that this process is heavily autocratic and is defined by top-down processes of decision-making, especially in the case of public projects like infrastructure development or public housing. Decisions are dictated by the powerful clients, rather than the end users. The solutions thus produced are a result not, the solutions produced as a result are not responsive to the needs of the users. This kind of process creates a gap between the city as built and experienced and the city as desired. Users become simple consumers of mass-produced alien cities. It's important to note that the designers involved are also instrumental in enabling such a process. So I'm just going to quickly do that. There is, like I said, there is an obsession not only with the functional, but also with the visual, because there is this mentality of what you see is what gets sold. Basically, mainstream architecture has always had this fixation with images, which has been furthered by the development of media. So all these flashy images that you see of renders of beautiful renders, to be fair, of these large-scale developments, um, like this image right here. Do you actually see any context here? Do you see the people who it serves? Do you see the purpose it serves? You barely see the streets here. It's just this sort of amplified image of the city, I mean, of this building, which has been sort of manipulated and sold to you. It's a spread. So um, there is this popular saying, which is form follows function, right? This is something every architect or designer has heard and was popularized during the modernist era. This forms the basis of most modernist design practices, which occurred in the late 19th and early 20th century. Mainly, this principle was intended to reject classical architecture, which was primarily motivated by a quest for beauty. Still, we find this principle to be lacking in the 21st century. Emphasizing the importance of design in of function in any design process is important, and it denotes a pursuit of efficiency. But are we looking to actually create machines for living? Where is the human aspect in all of this? Exclusion of the publics from city development has resulted in creating a McDonaldized city devoid of identity. What I mean by McDonaldize is that any public space that you go to in any sort of part of the urban environment, you see things here that you can see anywhere in the world, like a McDonald's model of store of restaurants that you find it anywhere in the world. The McDonald's is going to be the same. It's the same branding. This is the same kind of design that is followed. So what sets our city apart from other cities in the world? Nothing. That's how it is shaping up right now. So the public realm has become more of these malls, restaurants, theaters, and other such places, which are not actually public places, but are privatized public places. There are certain conditions that you need to satisfy to be allowed into such places. So how do you feel in such a space? Do you ever truly feel free in these spaces? Do you feel any ownership of these spaces? Or is it a very restrictive environment where your patterns of behavior are predefined? So we're going, space is often addressed from the point of view of the visual and the functional. There's this obsession with the image that we often see in any kind of design process, right? This kind of strips the space of any meaning to the users. Like I said, our cities are no longer identifiable to us, which means that we no longer feel any sort of belonging. And at the same time, we're also excluded from the conception, which means that we're also not particularly satisfied with the end results. So there are some key questions to be answered here. What is the purpose of space, specifically public space? Who constructs this space? Who does it serve? Who are the other players involved in creating space? What are each of their roles? That is, what are the dynamics of power involved in spatial practice? With all this in mind, we're going to try and define what is the meaning of participation. What is a city? Who are its citizens? What does it mean to participate in the city? Why is it necessary? So we're actually getting into the meat of it right now. What is participation? To put it very crudely, participation is the involvement of the user at some stage in the design process. It is done to make the space more relevant, to make the process of designing space more relevant to the world. It should ideally happen at all stages of this design process, which means that you are engaging in a process of co-design where all the stakeholders are involved in determining the brief and then in its development and making all the decisions right to the final product. But we rather seek consultation. Um, no standardized form of participation can be possible because you're dealing with different groups of people and different contexts, which means they need to be adapted, or sometimes you need to find completely new techniques to engage with communities. So this is legally required as a part of any design process for public projects in countries like the US and UK. However, despite the fact that this is legally mandated in many cities around the world, this sort of participation is often restricted to token consultation, intended to add extra credibility to these projects, to make it sound sort of more marketable. So ultimately, the participation process that you see around the world is furthering that sort of consumerist behavior. Let's also define democracy. Now, this is a word that we use quite often in our countries. We say democracy offers us certain rights, but how do we define it and how does it manifest spatially within the city? So, democracy is broadly interpreted as ruled by the people as opposed to a monarch or by nature. By definition, every form of democracy is somewhat participatory. However, it's quite difficult to say that, to authoritatively establish that this is democracy and this is not. There are quite a few variables involved, and it's difficult to frame a universally applicable definition. So there are different models of democracy, but these three are quite widely seen around the world. The first one is direct, second is representative, and third is participatory. Basically, direct democracy means that it is government by the people. It requires large-scale participation of citizens on all matters, but it offers you, though it's time-consuming and there's a lot of effort involved, it offers you complete transparency, and you can hold the sort of representatives to account. And there is also a greater degree of cooperation, citizen cooperation. However, there is also the danger of something that is called the tyranny of the majority, which is basically that there could be so many irreconcilable opinions that you cannot actually arrive at a decision. And also, this could create much more conflict around the world. So it's a lot more confrontational in its nature. Representative is the form of democracy that you see in most places around the world, including India. It basically involves citizens electing one representative who sort of rule in place of them, right? Citizen here becomes a private individual. This form of democracy assumes that the people lack time, knowledge, or general will, which is something we do see quite widely. But this form of democracy also means that there is a severe underrepresentation of minority groups and also an opportunity for corruption amongst the authorities. Finally, the third form of democracy that we are going to discuss today is sort of a compromise between direct and representative democracy. In this form of democracy, citizens are politically informed, engaged, and critical. So they're well informed of the voting records, say, of the elected officials. They can hold them to account much more than in representative democracy, simply because they are much more engaged in the city. The focus here is on achieving a consensus. So there is sort of a focus on the majority, which means that there is still scope for some exclusion of minority groups. But the idea is to try to get to as many people as possible. This is also a time-consuming process and can also become token consultation, like I already said before. So when looking at the cities, like going back to the beginning of cities or to our forefathers' eras, we look at sort of the Western model of democracy, which is based on the agora, which was this sort of public arena where people could engage with each other and which would sort of enable the decision-making process. At the same time, we have the Eastern model, which was seen in India, which is still seen in many parts of India, called the Panchayati Raj, where you see members of the local community gather and make decisions together. Now, neither of these processes or neither of these sort of forms of democracy are devoid of issues. For example, the Agora is famous for its slave markets and enabling that sort of repression of minority communities. And the Panchayati Raj again has you have something called as Khap Panchayat, which is caste-based panchayat systems happening even today in India. So these are issues that need to be addressed, but the model is still, I would argue, quite functional and quite useful in catalyzing future engagement. So, but despite all of these sort of previous models of democracy that we've had, right now what we see is the neoliberal city. You don't see people here, you see development here. The focus is on progress, the focus is on consumerism, the focus is on the desires of the individual rather than the collective. So the citizen is detached from the social environment, and there is a decay of identity that is constantly happening during this neoliberal era. As I already said, there is a lack of ownership with the city, and also a lack of access to authorities and holding them to account, apart from, say, every once in 5 years when we have the voting process that goes on. But despite this depleting sense of community and ownership and sort of this sense of the collective, I read quite an interesting and I'd say inspiring quote from the New York Times today, which said that the nature of a nation is that we are bound together in a community of shared obligation, purpose, and opportunity. So this is essentially the basis of a democracy, right? But unfortunately, this is what is being ignored in the current scenario. So there is a lack of participation in the contemporary cities. So what does this enable? It enables the creation of these soulless cities where the authorities are empowered. Like I was talking about the power dynamics, and you can see here that the authorities are probably at the top of the pyramid, followed by the designers who empower that sort of top-down process because that's what's easy, that's what's convenient, and that's what's lucrative as well. Then you have the private individuals, say the upper middle class or the upper class communities which are sort of, it's a more sort of self-obsessed form of citizenship rather than a community-driven approach to the city. And finally, you have the collective, which are the large masses of people who sort of inhabit our informal settlements, our social housing, and who do not have a say in how their environments are shaped. So this restricted role of the masses allows for a remedial approach to development and planning rather than one based on reason. What I mean here is that, say, for example, you have social housing, right? Social housing emerged as a concept following the World War, and where you needed to sort of house many more people who had lost their lost a lot of property during the World War and needed to be rehabilitated. So you have these social housing projects which are seen all around the world, but it's quite a template that you see all around the world. The focus is on minimizing space, it's on mass production, it's on so-called efficiency rather than quality of life. So here you're creating housing for people which is intended to merely keep them, like offer them shelter. What of the other aspects of life? What of a sense of camaraderie, of a public, of neighbors, of enjoying your living environment? None of that is seen. It's all it's its focus is on densification rather than the actual living. So we can tackle this with an expanded field of spatial practice for the transformation of built and urban environment. What I mean by this is that alternative approaches from the um, conventional sort of design process to a transformation of the built environment. So what I mean here is that you can look at alternative ways of engaging with citizens rather than going with the tried and tested method, which allows you to have much more of a robust sort of engagement process rather than a token one. So that's how we doing for time? Actually, pretty well. So right now, what I'm going to do is that we're going to get into a quick activity. Right. So as I said, we're looking at what future forms of participation could be. So basically, right now, especially in this post-COVID world that we are faced with, how do we effectively engage with people when social distancing has become such a critical issue for all of us? In this sort of scenario, what are the major challenges that we need to address? What role does a citizen, as individual citizens, we often complain that we can't effect any important changes in our urban environment. So how can we do that? And what are the future forms of active citizenship? So we see some key challenges right now, like climate change, pandemics. We have, density, density living environments. We have sanitation issues, congestion, loss of heritage, so on and so forth. So in this scenario, how do we frame future forms, future cities? Is the city even a relevant spatial or social construct, or how does that evolve? What is democracy? What is the future of how we engage with the city? So these are some important issues. So like I said, we need to discuss what the key issues of the post-pandemic world are. What are the values that should guide long-term social and economic policies? Because again, this pandemic doesn't only bring about a health crisis, but there is also a key economic crisis that is yet to really hit in its full force. Then social distancing could become the new norm of the city. Like maybe, for example, there were different diseases in the past that have reframed social practices that we've gone through in the past. So this pandemic that we see now, how would that shape future social interactions and the city at large? How safe can actual community engagement be? Like, we may not be in the kind of world where we can go around, sit and engage with individual members of communities in the same way that we were, say, a year ago. Does that mean that we're moving more towards digital engagement? Is that even feasible? Because we don't see the same level of connectivity that percolates down to every section of society. So in this scenario, can it even replace physical engagement? How do we engage those without any form of connectivity? and also what social activities need to be transformed in the future. Like, for example, how would the movie going experience change? How would, say, the shopping experience change? Um, can we retain the same form of experience by making a few changes in ourselves? Like, for example, if you were going to the movies and you were wearing a mask, would that make it as normal as we could have had it? But, or do we need more spacing between seats, and so on and so forth? So how would this transformation actually happen? So we're looking at this sort of engagement from a distance. So a few ideas that we've had that we've been involved with in the past were things like chalkboards, stickers, where you leave sort of these installments installations, sorry, in places where you allow people to engage without actually being in the same space at the time. The form of engagement that we see right now is highly spatial and sorry, highly time driven. Everyone needs to be at the same pace at the same time. But what if it was more space driven? If you could have forms of engagement which don't require you all to be present at the same time. So these are some visuals that we've seen around the world. Incredibly, this sort of pandemic where we've all been relegated to our own homes has brought out a sense of community that we've rarely seen in the past, because there is an inherent human need for interaction, for coexistence, which we see being addressed in different shapes and forms. How does that contribute to how engagement or even just the existence of a communal interaction, how does that shape that? So these are some important questions that we want to leave you with. We'd also like to hear any opinions that you have at this point. This will be the end of our first session today. We do intend to have more sessions in the near future, maybe once or twice a month. So in that case, we will be sending around a survey to hear your opinions about this webinar. That's basically it. If you have any further questions or if you want to engage with us further, you can email me at pritika@colab.in, or you can send us an email at info@colab.in. There are our Facebook and Instagram pages as well as our website. So if you want to contribute towards creating material on the city, whether it's in terms of mapping processes or in terms of writing, anything to do with the city, we are interested, we are excited to be involved with you. So thank you so much for joining today's session, and hopefully I will see you all back soon.